There was no evidence that Mr. Noriega was involved in drugs, no hard evidence until we indicted him.
Does the NSA collect any type of data at all on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans?
No, sir.
It does not.
Not wittingly.
Have we ever tried to meddle in other countries' elections?
Oh, probably, but it was for the good of the system.
Oh, we don't mess around other people's elections, Jim?
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Rackets Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Sadie. On this podcast, we cover a number of different topics, such as organized crime, crony capitalism, and very many facets of rackets. And we often cover many issues related to the criminal justice system. And I really have the perfect guest tonight. His name's Richard Bronson. He is the CEO of a company known as 70 Million Jobs, which is the first for-profit recruitment company for people with criminal records. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Thank you so much for having me. Nice to be here.
I was just kind of hoping just to start off, you could maybe give the audience a little bit of info about your background and why you started the company.
Sure. I now live in Los Angeles, but I grew up in New York. And like many people in New York who are after fame and fortune, I found myself working on Wall Street. I worked at a number of very large investment banking firms, and I did very, very well. I made a lot of money. But at a certain point, I decided I had enough of it. But I had a friend who convinced me to come visit where he was working at a small brokerage firm located on Long Island, which had the name Stratton Oakmont. That name may sound familiar to some of your listeners because that is the infamous Wolf of Wall Street firm from the Martin Scorsese film of Wolf of Wall Street. So I was there and I saw all these young guys mostly, and they weren't particularly educated or particularly special in any way, and yet they were making an enormous amount of money, an ungodly amount of money. And I just saw that and I said, well, I know what I'm doing, and I've got a college education, and if they're making this kind of money, I could do a lot better. So I decided to work there, and I did very well there, and I eventually became a partner at the firm. Everybody asks me, was the film accurate? And in general, yeah. I mean, it was wild. We had a lot of fun. We took a lot of drugs. We spent a lot of money. We took private planes. We went out with girls who were way out of our league. We gambled like lunatics and just had the greatest time together. I knew it was wrong. The other guys there made believe it wasn't wrong because they didn't really know any better. I eventually left that firm and I moved down to Florida, where I launched my own firm, which was very much modeled on that firm. And I had spectacular success with that. I ended up growing the firm to about 500 employees around the country. We had several offices. We were doing about $100 million in annual revenue. Unfortunately, some of what we were doing, again, fell outside the law. And I would love to say that it was a mistake, or it was someone else, or I didn't even know, but that would be a lie. I knew full well what I was doing. I was greedy, I was stupid, I was impatient, and I was rightfully punished for the whole thing. I ended up receiving a sentence of 2 years in federal prison. The prison sentence was relatively light because my partner and I, prior to being even arrested, we paid everybody back because we knew that the heat was on. We knew it was just a question of time before, the authorities would come knocking on our door, and we, not only thought, well, this is the right thing to do, because we were feeling guilty, but it was also, we figured, the smart thing to do. And in retrospect, I'm sure it was. Prior to going away to prison, after I paid everybody back and paid just ridiculous millions and millions of dollars in fines and settlements and penalties and lawyers' bills. Whatever I had left, and I still had a lot left, I gave away to charity because I was just so sick of myself and I was sick of money and what it had done to me. So I went away to prison for 2 years, and when I got out, I was essentially destitute and homeless. And it's an old story, you know, your friends disappear and all that kind of stuff. You know, I had that, you know, but it's a tired story. There was nothing special about me. I was just an idiot who got in trouble and paid the price for it, rightfully. It took me a long time, though, to get back on my feet. I just didn't know what I should do with myself. I wasn't even sure if my success had anything to do with me, or was it purely because I was breaking the law. You know, my confidence was just destroyed. It was a very, very difficult time for me. But as bad as it was, you know, I really couldn't help but think about the guys that I was in prison with, who were primarily young guys, men of color, who probably had barely completed high school. You know, what was their future like if it was as tough this way with me? But I was lucky. I ended up finding out and becoming involved and becoming hired by a nonprofit organization called DeFi Ventures, DEFY Ventures. And they have got kind of offices around the country, and their whole thing is to train people in and out of prison on entrepreneurialism, so theoretically they can start their own job and be in control of their economic destiny. So I did that for a while. It was very, very satisfying work. I felt finally I was doing some good rather than hurting people. But I had an idea while I was there, and that was that the whole reentry space in general had been handled the same way for decades by all these well-meaning local nonprofits and community organizations. But in the aggregate, they weren't getting that much done. You know, they weren't accomplishing that much. Unemployment among the formerly incarcerated right now has never been higher. Believe it or not, no population in this country has ever had a higher level of unemployment in this country, and that includes during the Great Depression, than today those who have criminal records. It's around 30% unemployment. And unemployment not only means that people can't put food on the table for themselves and their family, but typically it means that they're going to be rearrested. It's almost a lock that they will be rearrested very soon after being released, unless they get a job quickly. That's recidivism. And recidivism in this country, they say it has an economic cost alone of $160 billion. But, you know, it's destroyed lives and families and communities. So I felt like, you know something, I bet I can do better if I could pursue this as a for-profit venture versus nonprofit. I also thought that I bet I could make a lot of money doing it too. I don't happen to think there's anything wrong with doing good work and doing well. I think that's actually, you're seeing more and more of it. You know, it's a little bit different, but, you know, the bottom line was I was rich once, now I'm poor, and I'd much rather be rich. And if I could do it by saving lives and helping people, like what could possibly be better than that? So I left my work in the nonprofit space, and I launched 70 million jobs in New York. And almost immediately, the city of Los Angeles asked for my help to partner with them because they have a big problem with unemployment among their formerly incarcerated. And then from there, Y Combinator, which is the preeminent startup accelerator program in the world. It's a program that Reddit and Airbnb and Dropbox, you know, lots and lots of very successful unicorn startups went through. And they asked me to join, which was pretty amazing. And I went through that. I learned a lot. And then after that, I was successful in raising venture capital money to really start building a business. So I stuck around in San Francisco. And up until a couple of days ago, That's where we were for the last 2 years. But I decided to move the team down to Los Angeles, where we are. But in any event, that's a long answer to your question, but that's how we came to launching 70 million jobs.
And if you don't mind just telling me the significance behind the title of the company.
Sure. There are 70 million Americans who have some kind of criminal record, although there are people who think the number might be 100 million. 70 million, though, represents about 1 in 3 adults. And that's a figure that blows people's minds, because you're with a couple of friends, that means one of you statistically has a record. When I'm with my friends, it's more than 1 in 3, of course, but that's the crowd that I hang out with. But the fact that so many people have records, really has had a lot to do with how attitudes are changing quickly towards those people, who were formerly incarcerated, where it used to be, a nice person from a nice family, he or she didn't know people who were in prison. That's where, animals and rapists and terrible people went. But now, almost if you weren't directly affected by the criminal justice system, chances are you know somebody or have a relative who has. Sure. And as a result, when it's no longer us versus them, or, they're all animals, but when you start knowing some of the people and you know that they're not animals, they made a stupid decision, they did something wrong, they were young, who among us hasn't screwed up? Truly. I know a lot of people who are in prison because they had that one extra glass of wine or that one extra beer, got behind the wheel. Mm-hmm. We actually had a guy working for us. Terrible story. He's a great guy, a wonderful guy. He never did anything wrong, but he was, right after college, he was drinking with his friends, got behind the wheel. He hit someone and actually ended up killing him. And, it's a terrible, tragic story. The family obviously was devastated, but this guy who was not a bad guy, not an immoral guy, not an animal, just a guy who did something really stupid, for the rest of his life, he carries that around. Right. And if you meet him, that baggage weighs so heavily on him, you just know, that he doesn't give himself a break, 1 minute of the day. He's beating himself up over this terrible thing he did. Right. And, honestly, who among us hasn't done something that, at the wrong time or place, it could have gone much worse? Who hasn't asked forgiveness? Who hasn't said, I'm sorry, I cheated on you, or whatever? It's like we're human beings. We're flawed. We're not perfect. Right. And, in my observation in prison, I wasn't with drug lords or mass murderers or crazy people. I was just with guys who, they wanted to earn a buck. They didn't really know how else to do it. This is how everybody else was doing it, so they did it, and, they weren't bad people. They were the same as anybody else, in my experience. So, attitudes are changing very, very quickly. And what's happening in this country right now, they say it's better to be lucky than smart. We launched the company, and almost immediately unemployment in this country, other than people with records, but for everybody else, it hit an all-time low for 50 years, unemployment. And that has meant that the largest employers out there, and that's who we work with them because they have so many jobs they need to fill, and they recognize they can't afford to ignore any large pool of labor. And these 70 million people, not all of them certainly, but tens of millions of them, they're not seeing, that when their normal job of recruiting, they're new to them. And we provide these big companies, the largest employers in the country, we provide them with access to all this ignored talent. And frankly, I had no idea when I launched the company if these big companies would be interested in people with criminal records. I had no idea, and I certainly didn't know if they'd be willing to pay for the privilege. Mm-hmm. But it's turned out, like, just amazingly how much they they are willing. Part of it is great need on their part. Part of it is because they feel like it's the right thing to do. HR, we work with HR departments, and people in HR are very kind and compassionate people. They're people. I guess that's why they ended up doing what they do. And, they agree, who doesn't deserve a second chance? But what's shocking to me and to a lot of people is that it turns out that people with records very often turn out to be the very best employees, even better than people without records, because they really need the job. They don't have options. Right. So they have to make it work, and they're not about to screw things up, particularly if the job is okay. Right now, most companies experience terrible turnover with their employees. People don't feel any sense of loyalty to their companies anymore, so they jump around like crazy. My people, because they know that a company went out on a limb to hire them, so they return the favor with their loyalty, and they also know that there's probably not going to be easy for them to get another job. So again, stick around, make it work. And as a result, these people are heroes. They really make my job a lot easier than it could be.
You mentioned untapped talent, and it kind of sparked something in my head. Again, I've never been to prison, but one of the things that I've always been intrigued by are what I call the MacGyver types. It's these types who can make a tattoo machine out of a pen, and they're just these really resourceful, and just people have a lot of ingenuity. I'm assuming you probably came across similar examples, when you were in prison.
Well, yeah, you come across handy people. They're like anybody. You have people who can do anything, and then people like me who can't do anything. I would say what you do find, even more than MacGyver or being really handy, is you find a lot of people who are really good entrepreneurs, because many of the people in our prisons these days, or that have been released over the last few years, were there for drug-related offenses. And they weren't Colombian cartel people, but just someone who had a business, and they had a few people that they employed, and they had to work with supply and demand and security and, people and all the different logistics, all deliveries, all the kind of things that businesses have to deal with. And a lot of them were really very, very successful at it and very good. Of course, they got caught eventually, but, they were running successful businesses. And a lot of those skills are very translatable, just move the hustle from doing something illegitimate to something legitimate. And I know people who have done very, very well because they have that gene. But we have, a community of about 11 million people with records that we work with and that we help to get jobs, which is a huge number, obviously. And in 11 million, you get all types. You get doctors and lawyers, and you got people who are tech savvy. But the vast majority that we work with, those other type of people, they'll figure out, the MacGyvers, the great entrepreneurs, the people who know how to write code, they're going to figure it out. There's a demand for them. They'll do okay. They may not do as well as they would have if they didn't have the record, but they'll do okay. We're more interested in helping the people who really do need some help, because chances are they don't have any real, marketable skills. They're not particularly well educated necessarily, and yet they are terrific people, and they want to work hard. They're looking for a home. Very often they're married, they have kids, they're serious about their reentry. They just need one less door slamming in their face. That's what we try to provide. And those people, we have a great deal of success in reaching and helping out.
That's fantastic.
Thank you.
And one of the things we were talking about before we started recording is, I know you've got to juggle a million different tasks. And again, you are the CEO. I'm just kind of wondering, do you get to have any of that sort of that face-to-face time where you get to see some of these real success stories?
Yeah. That's a great point that you make. The business, by design, I set it up so that we could really scale it. My goal is to get 1 million people jobs, because we can get 1 million people jobs, we will have moved the needle. We will have accomplished a huge amount, far more than anyone's ever tried to do or accomplished. And in order to get 1 million people jobs, it has to be very scalable, which is to say that doesn't leave a lot of room for human interaction, you know. But having said that, it seems inevitable that we still have a lot of it with me and my team. And I'm very, very happy that we do, because, you know, I don't want to ever forget that these are human beings, and there are people who have emotions and needs and fears. And, you know, we get every day hundreds of people call us, and, you know, maybe they were big and tough on the street, you know, when they were slinging drugs or doing the wrong thing. But when it comes time to actually going after a traditional job, they're like a fish out of water, and often they're just scared shitless. Right. They are very, very afraid, and they're not used to being afraid, and they stay away from situations that they're afraid. But nonetheless, they know they have to go through it, you know. But they don't, you know, how do I upload my resume? Or I don't even know, how do I make a resume? And what do I say? And I just saw the guy, and I don't know if he liked me or not. What should I do? And all this kind of stuff. And my team, mostly, because they're a lot nicer than I am, they really just, you know, they get very close to people, and you can't help it, because these people are really just so appreciative that someone is taking the trouble to be a little nice to them and to help them. They're just not used to that at all. Right. And when people are, you know, they'll actually listen, you know, my people will listen and hear what they're saying and understand it, and not try to, you know, we don't charge them a penny. So we got no angle other than just to help them. We charge the companies to access this, you know, pool of talent and to advertise their jobs. But the applicants themselves, they don't pay a penny, and they really appreciate the fact that we got no angle other than to help them. And so we end up, you know, having connection. But beyond that, we also, I mentioned this nonprofit Defy Ventures. So I was director in New York of the organization. We're still involved with them. And that's when we really get to connect, because there's lots of opportunities, you know, to have events and meet with them and to help them. And we go into prisons a lot. You know, that's what we do in our spare time, because it is so moving, and it puts a face on the whole thing, and it inspires us to just work hard and do what we're doing.
I think it would also inspire them. Like if you're locked up, just to know that there is a future when you get outside.
100%. And that is the message that we try to, you know, leave them with, is, you know, just hang in there, get through this. And there are people, and it's not just us, because there's many other people who have, you know, who really do care and who have a heart. There's lots of nonprofits and community organizations that are out there. You know, as I said, they don't reach enough people, in my opinion, but the people they do, they really change their lives. And if you really are sincere, and if you take ownership of your past, and you say, you know, that was me then, but it's not who I am now, you can get a lot of help. You can get a job. You can get people in your corner, you know, and you can get going with your life. So that's the message that we're always trying to leave people with. You know, it blows my mind. I only went to prison a couple of years. I mean, we work with murderers, people who've been down for 30, 40 years who come out. And these are people who never saw a mobile phone, much less a computer, you know. And just imagine, like, what they're, you know, it's kind of like Twilight Zone, where you wake up and it's 40 or 30 years later, you know, and, you know, they have to get a job. You know, they're 50, 60 years old. What were they supposed to do? You know, so or even 40 years old. You know, they go away when they're 18 years old and they're down for 30 years. They still have a life ahead of them that they have no preparation for at all. You know, so I'm just blown. It blows my mind when I meet those people who they still have hope and belief. You know, they still want to believe that there's a future for them. You know, it can really bring a tear to your eye because, you know, in a way, you just, you know, you feel humbled to be around them. And talk about inspiring. I mean, they're just amazing people.
Yeah, you are definitely the eternal optimist.
Me?
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I'm not at all. They are. I am a jaded. Except for that, you're right. Except for this I believe in because I've seen it happen enough. You know, but everything else, I have no confidence in anything.
Okay. Well, then let me ask you this then, because I'm assuming that there's got to be some people who are kind of skeptical or cynical of some of the things you're saying. And I'm kind of curious, are there, say, like any sort of specific jobs that you've been able to fill that you think that might surprise the skeptics?
Well, you know, there is a study just came out from SHRM, SHRM, which is the National Human Resource Trade Organization that every top HR person belongs to. And they have a licensing thing with them and an education thing. Like the AMA is for doctors, SHRM is for the HR world. They just came out with this report that says that 82% of managers and 67% of HR professionals, when it comes to hiring people with records, this is what they said. You know, a vast majority of these people said that when it comes to hiring people with records, the people that we hire with records do as well, if not better, than the people who don't have records for the reasons I gave before.
Right.
So do they make believers out of people? They absolutely do. We typically will start working with a large company and they're not going to give us every job that they have at their 5,000 locations, you know, around the country. You know, they're going to test us first and see what happens because this is brand new for them. Mm-hmm. And they'll try it in 5 locations maybe. And they figure, all right, what's the worst that can happen? And inevitably, they come back to us and they say, we love the people we hired. Can we get more of them just like them? And it's funny to me, it always reminds me of like if you go out to dinner with a group of people and you order like some appetizers for the table to share. And when you realize, man, these are good, but we didn't order enough. Can we get more just like this? That's how they talk to us about these human beings. We didn't get enough. Can we get some more just like that? Prepared the same exact way. So they're the heroes again. You know, I mean, they just do a great job. They make us look good. I thought you were going to ask, though, that are there skeptics about me because I have a record? And, you know, that I don't know, because I suppose there are some people who do feel negatively towards me or don't trust me or whatever, but they never say anything. I haven't had in my work, I haven't had a single person open their mouth and say, listen, I just don't trust working with you and I'm not going to get past that. And, you know, as a result, you know, have a good day. Hasn't happened one time at all. I think people feel that, you know, my background gives me insights into the work that I do, which it does. And, you know, so I figure I'm doing the only thing I could do. Because if I was doing something else, I'm sure the trust would be a real issue. But because I understand personally the whole experience, you know, and I know how to talk to these folks and I know how to market to them and everything else, you know, that makes me, you know, a little bit more of an expert as a result. So, but you know, who knows what goes on in people. When someone says no, I don't know really why they're saying no. It could be because I just don't trust you. That's a possibility. I'd be naive if I didn't think that could happen. So, but in general, I'll tell people, right up front, I go, listen, just so you know, I myself have a record. And they go, oh, that's good. Like, it's funny, like, all right, you know what you're talking about, I guess.
Tribe. You're in
exactly.
The tribe.
One of the tribe, exactly. So I guess it's domain expertise I have as a result. So it's a very, very funny thing.
I would say, and I think from people without records, because there is a lot of strong anti-Wall Street sentiment, and for good reason.
Yep.
But the one thing I would point out is you were convicted at a time when, people actually went to prison. Now we've got this whole too big to fail. Pay a small fine. You committed your crimes back when the DOJ actually punished people.
Yeah. Well, I was very lucky that I got arrested prior to Bernie Madoff, because after Bernie Madoff, I know people who got 30 years, for some financial crime, whereas, if it was before, they would have gotten, 5 years maybe. So,
you didn't work for a quote unquote too big to fail bank. I know, and I will tell you, talking about being jaded, every person on Wall Street is a crook. That's not an excuse for me or anything I did. I don't believe that at all. Right.
I was a crook, but everybody else is as well. Wall Street is built upon, if I know something that you don't know, then I can use that to my advantage, and it's a zero-sum game. And how do you know it before I know it if it's not publicly available? Well, I have it's all based on inside information, ultimately. That's how analysts and that's how, companies trade based upon that. So it's all a bunch of crooks, making a lot of money, actually creating nothing, at all. All they're doing is, moving money around and taking off a sliver of it. But it just happens to be large sums of money they're getting slivers of. Right. So, any event, those were the good old days.
If you don't mind me, because it's probably I know you're short on time. This is something that's kind of controversial topic. I'd like to kind of hear your thought. The issue of prison labor, because in many cases there's these private companies. They're paying prisoners, less than $1 an hour, and in some cases, like in your area, it was in the news with the firefighters. If the firefighters are making 30-something bucks an hour, but there are prisoners right beside them, I think making a little bit over $1 an hour. My question is, do they, in your experience, do these people at least get the credit essentially when they do go out into the workplace? Say you had worked as a firefighter, or maybe not that particular profession, but some of them they're telemarketing jobs or textile jobs. Yeah. Do they tend to at least sort of get the credit for that when they do go out into the workplace?
Well, you bring up the firefighters. The last really bitter piece of that story is that in California, the fire companies would not hire people who have a record, who in prison were fighting fires at $1 an hour, like you said, but not because we don't want to pay them the $30. We don't want to pay them because they're ex-cons. But it was good enough while they were in prison to fight the fires and risk their lives. But now on the outside, they're not good enough for us. So that was pretty shameful. There's two schools of thought to this whole thing that you're bringing up. On the one hand, it sounds an awful lot like chain gangs and slavery and indentured servitude and all kinds of stuff like that, where you're taking advantage of people, and particularly people who don't have any money. In prison, you need to have a little bit of money available to you because there's a commissary where you want to make phone calls and, to stay in touch with your family, and needless to say, the prices you pay for the commissary or the phone calls are completely rip-off prices. But you do need a little bit of money. And, so the prison would say, well, not only are, we helping the inmates, have a little bit of disposable income, but also working, keeps them out of trouble, keeps their mind busy, time goes faster, and all that's true. You definitely want to have a job in prison, not because you're going to get rich, that's for sure. But, you do have a commissary, and if you can make $30 in a month, you can buy yourself, some Lipton cup of soup or some shit like that, when you're sick of eating the disgusting food. It's hard for me as someone who never had that problem, because I had friends, I had a few friends who were very generous, and my sister was generous. And, so I didn't need to work for the money, but I certainly knew people who did. So, far be it for me to say, you shouldn't be getting this because it mattered to them. But yeah, the most common job that people have that has value when they get out is in food service, because typically there's, licenses that you can get in food handling that, while it's not the greatest thing, if you want to work at, a fine dining establishment, to say, well, I would, I dished out beans on the line at the cafeteria in prison, but it doesn't hurt to have it. It's better than nothing. And indeed, restaurants, food service in general, on the outside, is one of those industries that have long been very hospitable to people with records, because it's just very hard for them to hold on to people, to be a line chef, stand on your legs all day, in the heat and the crowded little kitchen. It's not a great job, and it'll be a busboy or whatever. So they hire a lot of people with records. That's one industry. The one industry that doesn't, much to my shame, because I I'm part of that world, is the technology world. These big companies, the Googles and the Facebooks and the Apples and the like, they all claim to be very, caring and humanistic and progressive. But when it comes time to hiring people with records, they've been just absolutely abysmal in doing it. And every opportunity I have to call them out for it, I do. They go, well, we hire people who are engineers who have to have high skill levels. And that's true, certainly. But they have lots and lots of people who do food service or janitorial stuff or whatever, if they really wanted to say nothing of create some kind of program and train some of these people. And let's break the cycle and give them a job that, they can actually earn a good living and leave poverty and take care of their family and, really make a difference. And if you really care about making a difference, then make a difference. Do what it takes. Don't just talk about it, which is what they do. So I open my mouth all the time about that.
For good reason.
I think so. All
right. Well, I'm going to let you get back to work. Do you have any final thoughts for anyone who's listening, and also maybe any, anything you want to promote or at least contact or whatever? I'll give you the floor.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for having me, and thank you to your listeners for listening. I really do appreciate it. It's not just my work, it's not just my job, but, on a very personal level, people who care and who get it, really touches my heart, and I appreciate it. We never, ever, ever want to not help someone who comes to us looking for help. And we have hundreds and thousands who come to us every month, and we really try to help everybody. So if you know someone who could use some help with getting a job that has a record, you can very easily go to our website, which is 70millionjobs.com. The number 70millionjobs, JOBS.com. And you'll see information for contacting us, or it's a job board that someone can search and apply for jobs, or receive notifications of when jobs are available where they live. If you know companies, or if you yourself are a company that has an interest in hiring people with records, we can help with that for sure. And I will promise, I will almost promise you that you will end up with incredibly heroic, wonderful people if you give them a chance through us or through any other way. Also, there's lots of great nonprofits and community organizations out there. And I'm telling you, if you get involved, you will be shocked at how emotionally transformed you will be by connecting with people. These are really society's, the dregs, I hate to put it that way, but they understand, really people who really could use a hand, and they're so incredibly appreciative. And, listen, I ask everybody I meet, help me change the world, because that's what we're trying to do. So thanks so much for having me again, and thanks a lot for listening. I really appreciate it.
I just want to thank you for everything that you do. It really is inspiring, and I actually thought of it, a similar idea, like what can we do? And then I ended up looking up and looking into it. I'm like, oh my God, this already exists. So I really.
Are you looking for a job? Is that what you're telling me? You already got a job.
No, I'm employed, not very well paid, but I'm employed.
So join the crowd.
But I am really thankful for all that you do, and also thankful that taking the time to come on to the show. But last thought, I just want to thank everybody who's listening. Again, I guarantee you probably know somebody who's in a position who could use his help. So please, like I say, support the podcast, share it, subscribe. And really the best way to support the podcast as well is just to go out there and grab a copy for direct support. That is just go out and grab a copy of my 3-book series. It's called Rackets. It's on the legalization of drugs and gambling and the decriminalization of prostitution. So on that thought, until next time.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
I am concerned that the size of some of these institutions becomes so large that it does become difficult for us to prosecute.
You can have a license. Price is $250,000 plus a monthly payment of 5% of the gross of all 4 hotels in the store. Corleone.